Welcome to Sleepy Philosophy. It's wonderful to have you here tonight, wherever you may be resting. Perhaps you're nestled under soft blankets, watching shadows dance on your ceiling, or maybe you're in that perfect spot on your couch where the world feels just right. If you find these philosophical journeys helpful for sleep, a gentle like and subscribe truly helps this little channel find its way to others seeking peaceful wisdom. And to those of you who are already part of this quiet community, thank you. Your presence means more than you know. Tonight we're going to explore the mind of René Descartes, a 17th century French philosopher whose ideas about doubt, certainty, and the nature of existence changed how we think about reality itself. So let's begin, shall we? What does it mean to truly know something? And how can we be certain that anything we believe is actually real? Picture yourself waking up one morning and suddenly questioning everything around you. The bed beneath you, the walls of your room, even your own hands. What if none of it is real? What if everything you've ever believed to be true is nothing more than an elaborate illusion? This isn't the plot of a science fiction movie. This is precisely where René Descartes chose to begin his philosophical journey in the early 1600s. Descartes lived in a world where old certainties were crumbling. The medieval worldview, built on ancient authorities and religious doctrine, was being challenged by new scientific discoveries. Galileo's telescope revealed moons around Jupiter. The Earth, it seemed, was not the centre of the universe. If such fundamental beliefs could be wrong, what else might be mistaken? Descartes felt this uncertainty deeply, and rather than shy away from it, he decided to dive straight into the heart of doubt itself. But Descartes wasn't interested in doubt for its own sake. He wasn't trying to become a skeptic who questioned everything endlessly without hope of answers. Instead, he wanted to use doubt as a tool, a method for clearing away all uncertain beliefs so that he might discover what, if anything, could be known with absolute certainty. Think of it like clearing a cluttered room. Before you can organise it properly, sometimes you need to take everything out and start with an empty space. This approach came to be known as methodical doubt or systematic doubt. Descartes would systematically question every type of belief he held, looking for anything that could possibly be false. If he could find even the smallest reason to doubt something, he would set it aside no matter how reasonable or obvious it seemed. His goal was to find bedrock, something so undeniably true that no amount of questioning could shake it. Let's walk through this process together, gently, like clearing morning fog a window. First, from Descartes turned his attention to his senses. We tend to trust what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. Our senses seem to give us direct contact with the world around us. But Descartes noticed that our senses sometimes deceive us. A stick appears bent when placed in water. The sun looks smaller than it actually is. We see mirages in the desert. Sometimes we think we hear our name called when no one is there. If our senses can deceive us sometimes, Descartes reasoned, how can we be absolutely certain they're not deceiving us all the time? Perhaps what we take to be the external world is nothing more than a collection of sensory illusions. This doesn't mean Descartes believed our senses were always wrong, but for the purposes of his method, he needed to set aside anything that could possibly be doubted. But surely you might think, even if our senses sometimes mislead us about the details, we can at least be certain that we have bodies, that we're sitting or lying somewhere, that there's a physical world around us. Descartes considered this too. Even if specific sensory experiences might be illusions, surely the basic fact of having a body in a physical world is undeniable. Here's where Descartes introduced one of his most famous thought experiments. What if you're dreaming right now? Think about your most vivid dreams. While you're dreaming, the dream world feels completely real. You don't usually realize you're dreaming until you wake up. In dreams, you have conversations. You walk through familiar places. You experience emotions. The dream world can seem every bit as convincing as waking life. Now, if dreams can feel so real while we're having them, How can we be absolutely certain that what we take to be waking life isn't just another kind of dream? Perhaps you think you're lying in bed listening to a philosophy video, but you're actually asleep somewhere else entirely, dreaming this whole experience. There's no foolproof way, while you're having an experience, to determine with absolute certainty whether it's a dream or waking reality. This dream argument doesn't prove that life is a dream. Descartes wasn't trying to convince anyone that nothing was real. He was simply showing that the possibility of dreaming meant we couldn't be absolutely certain about the existence of our bodies or the physical world around us. For his method of systematic doubt, this uncertainty was enough to set these beliefs aside temporarily. But even if everything we experience through our senses might be illusory, and even if we might be dreaming, surely some things must still be true. Mathematical truths, for instance. 2 + 3 = 5, whether you're awake or dreaming, whether your senses are reliable or not. The angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees, regardless of whether triangles exist in the physical world. These seem like truths of reason, not dependent on sensory experience. Descartes considered this possibility carefully. Even if the entire physical world were an illusion, mathematical relationships would still hold true. A square would still have 4 sides, even if there were no actual squares anywhere in reality. These logical truths seem to exist in a realm beyond the reach of sensory deception or dream uncertainty. But then Descartes pushed his doubt even further, introducing what might be his most radical skeptical scenario. What if there exists a powerful deceiver, an evil genius or evil demon, who has the ability to manipulate your mind directly? This being could make you believe that 2 + 3 = 5 when it actually equals something else entirely. It could implant false mathematical intuitions, create the illusion of logical reasoning, and make you think you're following clear rational arguments when you're actually being systematically misled. This evil demon hypothesis is quite different from simply questioning whether our senses are reliable. Descartes was now questioning whether our very capacity for rational thought could be trusted. If such a being existed, it could deceive you about literally everything. Every thought you think, every logical conclusion you reach, every mathematical insight you have, could be the result of systematic deception. Now, you might wonder why Descartes would introduce such an extreme and seemingly paranoid scenario. Wasn't he going too far? The point wasn't that Descartes actually believed in such an evil deceiver. Rather, he was trying to push doubt to its absolute limits. If he could find something that remained true even in the face of this ultimate skeptical challenge, then he would have discovered something genuinely indubitable, something that no amount of doubt could shake. This might seem like a rather dark way to begin a philosophical system by imagining the most comprehensive deception possible. But there's something almost peaceful about Descartes' approach, if you think about it. He's not running away from uncertainty or pretending that difficult questions don't exist. Instead, he's facing them head-on, meeting doubt with such thoroughness that it becomes a kind of philosophical courage. Think of it like this. Many of us go through life with a vague anxiety that maybe we don't know as much as we think we do. Maybe our beliefs aren't as well founded as we'd like them to be. Descartes decided to take this worry seriously, to follow it all the way to its conclusion. What if we really don't know anything? What if everything we believe is false? Rather than live with that background anxiety, he chose to inhabit doubt completely, to see what would happen if he took it to its logical extreme. And here's the beautiful thing about Descartes' journey through doubt. Just when everything seems most uncertain, just when it appears that nothing at all can be known for certain, he makes a remarkable discovery. Even in the midst of universal doubt, even when questioning everything, including his own rational faculties, there's one thing that cannot be doubted. The very act of doubting proves that something exists. You cannot doubt that you are doubting. You cannot think that you're not thinking. Even if an evil demon is deceiving you about everything else, even if all your thoughts are systematically false, the fact that thinking is occurring cannot itself be an illusion. This insight led Descartes to his famous conclusion, often summarized in the Latin phrase, Cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am. But we'll explore this groundbreaking realization and everything that flows from it as we continue our gentle journey through Descartes' philosophical world. For now, as we pause in this moment of ultimate doubt, there's something almost meditative about where we find ourselves. All the usual certainties have been stripped away. The external world, our bodies, even mathematical truths, all suspended in a cloud of uncertainty. And yet in this apparent emptiness, Descartes was about to discover something profound. It's a bit like sitting in complete darkness and gradually realizing that the darkness itself is something you can perceive, which means there must be someone there to perceive it. Sometimes we have to lose everything we think we know before we can discover what we truly know. As you settle deeper into this exploration, let yourself feel the strange comfort of Descartes' systematic doubt. There's no pressure to defend any particular belief, no need to justify what you think you know. Just the quiet space of questioning, the gentle rhythm of philosophical inquiry, and the promise that even in the depth of uncertainty, something true and unshakable awaits discovery. Let's continue now with what happens when Descartes emerges from this valley of doubt, carrying with him perhaps the most famous philosophical insight in Western thought. Even if everything else can be questioned, even if reality itself might be an elaborate deception, there remains one thing that cannot be doubted. The very fact that doubt is occurring proves that something exists to do the doubting. This is where we encounter Descartes' celebrated Cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. But let's unpack this gently, like opening a letter that's been carefully folded. The insight isn't just that thinking proves existence. It's more subtle and more profound than that. When Descartes says I think, he's not making a claim about the nature of thinking, or even about what kind of thing he is. He's simply noting that the activity of thinking is undeniably present. Try this for yourself if you'd like. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice that you're having thoughts about what you're hearing. Maybe you're agreeing or disagreeing. Maybe you're forming mental images, or perhaps your mind is wandering to something else entirely. Whatever the content of your thoughts, the fact that thinking is happening is impossible to deny. Even if you tried to convince yourself that you're not thinking, that very attempt would itself be a thought. This isn't a logical argument in the traditional sense. Descartes isn't saying all thinking beings exist, I am a thinking being, therefore I exist. That would be circular reasoning, since it would assume the very thing he's trying to prove. Instead, the cogito is what philosophers call a performative contradiction. The act of doubting your own existence demonstrates your existence in the very performance of the doubt. What's particularly elegant about this discovery is that it remains true, regardless of how extensive the deception might be. Even if an evil demon is manipulating every single one of your thoughts, making you believe false things about mathematics, about the external world, about logic itself, the demon cannot make it false that thinking is occurring. The deception itself requires a mind to be deceived. But notice something important here. Descartes hasn't proven that his body exists, or that there's an external world, or even that his thoughts correspond to reality in any meaningful way. All he's established is that something that can be called I exists as a thinking thing. This I might be nothing more than a stream of consciousness, a series of mental events with no physical basis whatsoever. This leads us to one of the most significant aspects of Descartes' philosophy, his sharp distinction between mind and matter, between what he called res cogitans, the thinking substance, and res extensa, the extended substance. From the Cogito, Descartes concluded that his essence, what he fundamentally is, consists entirely in being a thinking thing. He writes that he could conceive of himself existing without a body, but he could not conceive of himself existing without thought. Now, this might seem like a strange conclusion. After all, our everyday experience suggests that our minds and bodies are intimately connected. When we're tired physically, our thinking becomes sluggish. When we're emotional, we feel it in our bodies. Pain seems to exist at the intersection of physical and mental experience, but Descartes was making a more fundamental point about the nature of identity and existence. Think about it this way. You might lose a limb and still be you. You might undergo dramatic physical changes and remain the same person. But can you imagine being you without any mental life whatsoever? Descartes suggested that what makes you you is not your physical characteristics, but your consciousness, your capacity for thought, doubt, belief, and experience. This insight has profound implications that ripple through centuries of philosophical thought. If the mind is essentially different from the body, if consciousness is fundamentally non-physical, then what happens to the mind when the body dies? Descartes believed this supported the possibility of the soul's immortality, though he was careful to distinguish between what philosophy could demonstrate and what required faith. But the mind-body distinction also creates what philosophers call the interaction problem. If mind and matter are completely different types of substances, how do they interact? How does a non-physical mind cause physical movements in the body? How do physical events in the brain give rise to mental experiences? This question, sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness, continues to puzzle philosophers and scientists today. Descartes proposed that interaction occurred through the pineal gland, a small structure in the brain that he thought was the seat of the soul. This might seem quaint to us now, but it represents Descartes' attempt to take seriously both the distinctiveness of mental life and the obvious fact that minds and bodies seem to influence each other constantly. Let's pause here and consider what Descartes has accomplished so far. Starting from universal doubt, he's established the certainty of his own existence as a thinking being. But this leaves him in a rather solitary position. He knows that he exists, but what about everything else? Is he alone in the universe, a single mind surrounded by illusion? This is where Descartes makes another remarkable move. Having established his own existence through the cogito, he turns his attention to his ideas, to the contents of his consciousness. Among these ideas, he finds something particularly interesting. He has an idea of God, conceived as a perfect, infinite being. Now, where could this idea have come from? Descartes argued that he himself, being finite and imperfect, could not have created the idea of infinite perfection. The cause of an idea must have at least as much reality as the idea itself. Since he is finite, he cannot be the source of an idea of the infinite. Therefore, this idea must have been placed in him by something that actually possesses infinite perfection, namely, God. This argument might seem strange to modern ears, but it reflects Descartes' careful attention to the relationship between thoughts and their sources. He's not just assuming God exists and then trying to prove it. He's examining the contents of his own mind and asking what could account for the particular ideas he finds there. From this, Descartes develops what's known as the ontological argument for God's existence. The idea of God, he argues, includes the idea of existence, just as the idea of a triangle includes having three sides. Just as you cannot have a triangle without three sides, you cannot have God without existence. To think of God as non-existent would be like thinking of a triangle as having four sides, a contradiction in terms. These arguments for God's existence serve a crucial role in Descartes' system. If God exists and is perfect, then God is not a deceiver. A perfect being would not systematically mislead his creatures. This means that the evil demon hypothesis can be dismissed. Our basic rational faculties, our clear and distinct perceptions, can be trusted because they come from a benevolent creator who would not allow us to be systematically deceived about fundamental truths. With God as a guarantor of truth, Descartes can now begin to rebuild knowledge on a secure foundation. He can trust mathematics again, because mathematical truths are perceived clearly and distinctly, and God would not deceive him about such matters. He can have confidence in careful reasoning, because the capacity for reason itself comes from God. But what about the external world? Can Descartes move beyond the certainty of his own existence and the existence of God to establish that there really is a physical world outside his mind. This proves to be one of the most challenging aspects of his philosophy. Descartes argues that he has a strong natural inclination to believe in the existence of physical objects. When he sees what appears to be a tree, he naturally believes there's actually a tree there, not just an idea of a tree in his mind. Moreover, these sensory experiences seem to come to him involuntarily. He cannot simply decide to see a tree when there's no tree present. Since God is not a deceiver, and since God has given him these natural beliefs about the external world, along with sensory experiences that seem to point to external objects, Descartes concludes that there must indeed be a physical world. However, this world might not be exactly as it appears to the senses. The real properties of physical objects are not their colours, tastes, or smells, which might exist only in the mind, but their mathematical properties like size, shape, and motion. This leads to Descartes' influential distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Primary qualities like extension, figure, and motion belong to objects themselves. Secondary qualities like colour, taste, and smell are ways that primary qualities affect our minds through our senses. When you see a red rose, the redness exists in your perception, but the physical rose possesses only certain mathematical properties that cause you to experience redness. This mechanistic view of the physical world was revolutionary in Descartes' time and helped lay the groundwork for modern science. If the physical world consists entirely of matter in motion, then it can be studied mathematically. The Book of Nature, as Galileo had said, is written in the language of mathematics, and Descartes provided a philosophical foundation for this scientific worldview. Yet even as Descartes rebuilt a picture of reality that included mind, God, and the material world, his philosophy raised as many questions as it answered. The relationship between mind and body remained puzzling. How could an immaterial soul interact with a mechanical body? If animals are merely complex machines without souls, as Descartes suggested, what explains the apparent continuity between human and animal behaviour? And there were deeper questions about the nature of knowledge itself. Even with God as a guarantor of truth, how can we be sure we're correctly identifying which of our perceptions are clear and distinct? Might we be deceived about our very capacity to distinguish truth from falsehood? These questions would occupy philosophers for generations, but they don't diminish the remarkable achievement of Descartes' systematic journey from doubt to certainty. He showed that even the most radical skepticism contains within itself the seeds of knowledge. In the very act of questioning everything, we discover something that cannot be questioned. There's something deeply human about this philosophical journey. We all experience moments of uncertainty, times when we wonder what we can really count on. Descartes offers us a method for facing such uncertainty directly, not by avoiding difficult questions, but by following them to their conclusion. And he shows us that even in the depths of doubt, even when everything familiar has been stripped away, something essential remains. As you continue to rest and reflect on these ideas, consider how they might apply to your own experience of certainty and uncertainty. When do you feel most sure of something? What kinds of doubts trouble you most? And what, in your own life, feels as undeniable as Descartes' "I think, therefore I am"? The beauty of Descartes' philosophy lies not just in its logical structure, but in its recognition that thinking itself is a kind of existence, that consciousness is not just a tool for understanding reality, but is itself a fundamental feature of reality. In a universe that might otherwise seem cold and mechanical, the fact of thinking, the reality of inner experience, remains warm and immediate and undeniably present. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Descartes' journey through doubt is how it mirrors something we all experience in quieter moments. Have you ever lain awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering about the nature of your own thoughts? There's something almost mystical about becoming aware of awareness itself, about noticing that you're noticing. This is the territory Descartes opened up for us, this strange and wonderful realm where consciousness examines itself. As we continue our gentle exploration of his philosophy, we find ourselves moving from the certainty of the thinking self toward questions that feel both ancient and utterly contemporary. If I can be certain that I exist as a thinking being, what does this tell us about the nature of thought itself? What does it mean to have a mind that can doubt, believe, imagine, and reason? Descartes spent considerable time examining the different types of mental activities he could identify within himself. There were his sensory experiences, of course, but he noticed these seemed less reliable, more subject to error and illusion. Then there were his emotions, his desires, his acts of will. But perhaps most interesting to him were what he called his intellectual perceptions, those moments when his mind seemed to grasp something with perfect clarity. Think about mathematical insight, for instance. When you suddenly understand why the angles of a triangle must add up to 180 degrees, there's a quality of certainty that feels different from other kinds of knowledge. It's not just that you believe it to be true, or that someone has told you it's true. You see its truth directly, with what Descartes called clear and distinct perception. This became central to his method for rebuilding knowledge after the devastation of systematic doubt. If God exists and is not a deceiver, then whatever we perceive clearly and distinctly must be true. Our minds, created by a perfect being, are fundamentally oriented toward truth when they function properly. The key is learning to distinguish between genuine clarity and what merely seems clear because we're familiar with it or want it to be true. But this raises a fascinating question about the relationship between individual minds and universal truth. When Descartes perceived mathematical relationships clearly and distinctly, was he discovering something that existed independently of his mind? Or was his mind somehow participating in a larger rational structure that underlies reality itself? This question becomes even more intriguing when we consider Descartes' famous method of coordinate geometry, which allowed him to represent geometric shapes algebraically. In this system, every point on a plane can be described by two numbers, its distance from two perpendicular lines. This insight, which seems so natural to us now that we learn it in school, represents a profound recognition that space itself has a mathematical structure. There's something deeply peaceful about contemplating this mathematical order, underlying the apparent chaos of sensory experience. Even if the colours we see and the sounds we hear exist primarily in our minds, rather than in the external world, the spatial relationships, the patterns of motion, the underlying geometric structure of reality remains constant and knowable. Descartes found great comfort in this mathematical certainty. In a world where religious and political authorities were increasingly questioned, where new scientific discoveries overturned ancient beliefs almost daily, mathematics offered a refuge of eternal truth. 2 plus 3 would equal 5 whether the earth revolved around the sun or vice versa, whether kings ruled by divine right or by consent of the governed. Yet this mathematical vision of reality also created what some see as a kind of cosmic loneliness. If the real world consists only of particles in motion, described completely by mathematical laws, where do beauty, meaning, and purpose fit in? Descartes' dualism, his separation of mind and matter, was partly an attempt to preserve a space for these essentially human experiences in an increasingly mechanistic universe. Consider how this plays out in his understanding of human nature. You are, according to Descartes, essentially a thinking substance temporarily united with a physical body. Your thoughts, your personality, your memories, your capacity for reason and emotion, all of this belongs to the mental realm. Your body, meanwhile, operates according to the same mechanical principles that govern all physical objects. This might sound rather cold, but Descartes saw it as profoundly liberating. If your essential nature is mental rather than physical, then you're not simply a complex machine, not merely the product of material forces beyond your control. You have genuine agency, real freedom, authentic moral responsibility. Your thoughts and choices matter in a way that purely physical events cannot. The implications ripple outward in fascinating ways. If animals lack rational souls, as Descartes believed, then they're essentially sophisticated machines, complex but ultimately predictable systems of stimulus and response. This might seem harsh to our contemporary sensibilities, but it reflected Descartes' conviction that rationality, the capacity for genuine thought and choice, represents something genuinely special in the universe. For human beings, however, this capacity for rational thought creates both tremendous possibility and tremendous responsibility. Unlike animals who simply follow their instincts, humans must actively engage in the pursuit of truth. We can choose to examine our beliefs carefully or accept them uncritically. We can follow the evidence where it leads or allow wishful thinking to cloud our judgment. This is where Descartes' method becomes not just an intellectual exercise, but a kind of spiritual discipline. The practice of systematic doubt, of carefully examining our beliefs and setting aside anything that isn't absolutely certain, becomes a way of purifying the mind, of creating space for genuine insight to emerge. There's something almost meditative about this process when approached with the right spirit. Rather than clinging defensively to our existing beliefs, we learn to hold them lightly, to be willing to let them go if they prove unreliable. This requires a kind of intellectual courage, a willingness to face uncertainty without immediately rushing to fill the void with comfortable assumptions, and yet, as Descartes discovered, this willingness to dwell in uncertainty, to really inhabit doubt rather than merely pay lip service to it, creates the conditions in which genuine certainty can emerge. It's only when we stop defending our preconceptions that we become capable of recognizing truth when it presents itself. This has profound implications for how we approach learning and growth in our daily lives. How often do we really examine our fundamental assumptions about ourselves, our relationships, our purpose in life? How often do we create space for genuine questioning rather than simply confirming what we already believe? Descartes suggests that this kind of radical honesty with ourselves is not just intellectually beneficial, but morally necessary. If we're going to live authentic lives, if we're going to make genuine choices rather than simply following habit and convention, we need to know what we actually believe and why we believe it. But this process of self-examination reveals something beautiful about human consciousness. The very fact that we can question our own beliefs, that we can step back and examine our own mental processes, suggests that there's something in us that transcends the immediate contents of experience. There's an observer within the observed, a thinker who can examine thoughts themselves. This capacity for self-reflection, for what philosophers call metacognition, is perhaps what Descartes found most remarkable about human nature. We don't just think, we think about thinking. We don't just have experiences, we can examine the nature of experience itself. We don't just exist, we can contemplate the meaning of existence. As you rest here tonight, perhaps you can sense this quality of awareness in yourself. There are thoughts arising and passing away, sensations coming and going, but there's also something that notices all of this, something that remains present and aware through all the changing contents of consciousness. Descartes would say this witnessing awareness, this capacity for self-reflection, is the most certain and most precious thing about you. It's what allows you to engage in philosophy in the first place, to consider questions about the nature of reality and knowledge and existence. It's what makes possible not just learning, but genuine understanding. Not just belief, but authentic insight. And it's what connects you to the universal human quest for truth and meaning. The same quest that drove Descartes to begin his remarkable journey through doubt towards certainty. In recognizing the certainty of your own existence as a thinking being, you participate in something larger than yourself. You join a conversation that spans centuries, connecting minds across time and space in the shared recognition that consciousness itself is perhaps the most mysterious and wonderful fact about the universe we inhabit. As we settle deeper into this philosophical reverie, let's turn our attention to how Descartes' insights about the thinking self illuminate something profound about human freedom and moral responsibility. Having established that we exist fundamentally as conscious beings capable of rational thought, Descartes opens up questions that touch the very heart of what it means to live an authentic human life. Consider for a moment the remarkable fact that you can choose what to believe. Right now, as these words reach your awareness, you're not simply a passive recipient of information. You're actively evaluating, considering, perhaps agreeing or disagreeing with the ideas being presented. This capacity for judgment, for weighing evidence and coming to conclusions, represents what Descartes saw as one of the most godlike aspects of human nature. Yet this freedom comes with a peculiar burden. Unlike the certainty we found in the Cogito, our daily judgments about the world around us require us to go beyond what we can know with absolute certainty. We must make decisions based on incomplete information, form beliefs about matters that remain partially hidden from view. This is where Descartes' philosophy becomes not just a theoretical exercise, but a practical guide for living wisely. Think about the choices you face in your own life, whether to trust someone who's disappointed you before, whether to pursue a dream that might not succeed, whether to believe that your efforts to be kind and generous make any real difference in a world that often seems indifferent to such gestures. None of these decisions can be made with mathematical certainty, yet they shape the very texture of your existence. Descartes suggests that in such situations, we should strive to make our judgments as clear and distinct as possible, even while acknowledging their provisional nature. We can examine our motivations honestly. We can consider the evidence available to us carefully. We can remain open to changing our minds when new information emerges. This isn't about achieving perfect certainty in every decision, but about approaching uncertainty with intellectual integrity. There's something deeply compassionate about this approach to human fallibility. Descartes doesn't expect us to be infallible. He recognizes that error is an inevitable part of finite rational beings trying to navigate a complex world. What matters is not that we never make mistakes, but that we approach our decision-making with humility, careful attention, and a genuine commitment to truth. This brings us to one of the more subtle aspects of Descartes' philosophy, his understanding of the will and its relationship to understanding. He observed that our capacity to affirm or deny, to say yes or no to propositions, often extends beyond what our understanding can clearly grasp. We can choose to believe things that we don't fully comprehend, or withhold belief from things that seem probable, but not certain. This mismatch between the scope of the will and the limits of understanding is, according to Descartes, the source of human error. When we affirm something that we don't perceive clearly and distinctly, when we let our desires or fears or social pressures override our careful judgment, we step outside the bounds of reliable knowledge and into the realm of mere opinion or wishful thinking. But notice that this analysis doesn't lead to paralysis or endless doubt. Instead, it offers a path toward intellectual maturity. By learning to align our judgments with our understanding, by being willing to say "I don't know" when we genuinely don't know, we create space for authentic insight to emerge. We stop filling every uncertainty with hasty conclusions and begin to appreciate the texture of not knowing itself. This has profound implications for how we relate to others and to ourselves. How often do we rush to judge situations we don't fully understand? How frequently do we form strong opinions about complex matters based on limited information? Descartes invites us to cultivate a different relationship with uncertainty, one that sees the acknowledgement of ignorance not as weakness but as wisdom. In your own quiet moments of self-reflection, you might notice this dynamic at work. There are aspects of your own personality, your own motivations, your own deepest beliefs that remain somewhat mysterious even to you. Rather than pretending to understand yourself completely, Descartes would encourage a stance of gentle curiosity, an ongoing willingness to discover new aspects of your own inner landscape. This connects to something beautiful about Descartes' vision of human growth and learning. Since we exist fundamentally as thinking beings, our capacity for understanding is not fixed, but can be developed and refined throughout our lives. We can become better at distinguishing between clear and confused ideas. We can learn to recognize our own cognitive biases and emotional influences on our judgment. We can cultivate what we might call intellectual virtues. The pursuit of knowledge becomes, in this light, not just an academic exercise, but a form of spiritual development. Each time we choose careful reasoning over hasty judgment, each time we remain open to evidence that challenges our preconceptions, each time we acknowledge the limits of our understanding with honesty rather than defensiveness, we become more fully ourselves. This is perhaps why Descartes found such deep satisfaction in mathematical reasoning. Not because mathematics is the only form of valid knowledge, but because it provides a clear example of what human thinking can achieve when it operates with precision and care. The geometric proofs that delighted him weren't just logical exercises, but demonstrations of the human mind's capacity to participate in eternal truths. Yet Descartes was equally fascinated by the more mysterious aspects of consciousness. He spent considerable time reflecting on the nature of imagination, that strange capacity to form mental images of things not present to the senses. When you imagine a sunset you witnessed years ago, or picture the face of someone you love, something remarkable is happening. Your mind is creating, not just passively receiving or analysing. This creative aspect of consciousness suggests that we're not merely rational calculating machines, even at our best. There's something in human awareness that goes beyond logical deduction, something that can envision possibilities, explore counterfactuals, and generate novel combinations of ideas. This imaginative capacity is essential to creativity, to empathy, to hope, to all the ways we transcend the immediate givens of our situation. Descartes saw imagination as a kind of bridge between the purely intellectual and the sensory aspects of human experience. When we imagine, we're not quite thinking in the abstract mathematical way that characterizes our clearest rational insights, but we're also not simply receiving sensory data from the external world. We're actively constructing mental content, participating in the creation of our own inner experience. This has fascinating implications for understanding memory, creativity, and personal identity over time. Your memories aren't just stored copies of past experiences, but are reconstructed each time you recall them, influenced by your current state of mind, your subsequent experiences, and your ongoing sense of who you are. In remembering, you're not just accessing the past, but actively creating a narrative that connects your present self with previous versions of yourself. This fluid, creative aspect of consciousness might seem to conflict with Descartes' emphasis on clear and distinct perception, but he saw them as complementary aspects of a rich mental life. We need both the precision of mathematical reasoning and the flexibility of imagination. We need both the ability to perceive truth clearly and the capacity to explore possibilities creatively. Think about how this plays out in practical decision-making. When facing an important choice, you don't just analyse the logical pros and cons, you also imagine how different options might feel, envision yourself in various possible futures, consider how your choice might affect not just yourself but others you care about. This imaginative exploration is an essential part of wise judgment, even though it goes beyond what can be demonstrated with logical certainty. Descartes' philosophy thus offers us a vision of human beings as remarkably complex and capable creatures. We are rational animals, capable of mathematical insight and logical deduction, but we are also imaginative beings, capable of creativity and empathy and hope. We are mist-dyed souls justly united with physical bodies that connect us to the material world. We are finite creatures with an orientation toward the infinite, limited beings with unlimited aspirations. This complexity means that living well requires a kind of dynamic balance. We need the humility that comes from recognizing our limitations and the confidence that comes from recognizing our genuine capacities. We need the precision of careful reasoning and the openness of imaginative exploration. We need both the certainty we can achieve in limited domains and the grace to act wisely in the face of uncertainty. As you rest here in this quiet space, perhaps you can sense something of this remarkable complexity within your own experience. There's the clear awareness that notices these words, the imaginative capacity that forms mental images as you listen, the emotional resonance that connects these ideas to your own life experiences. All of this is you. All of this is the thinking substance that Descartes identified as your essential nature. But there's also something that transcends any particular thought or image or feeling, something that remains present through all the changing contents of consciousness. This witnessing awareness, this capacity to observe your own mental processes with a kind of loving attention, is perhaps what Descartes found most remarkable about human existence. It's what allows you to engage in philosophy, to consider questions about the nature of reality and knowledge and existence. It's what makes possible genuine dialogue with others, since you can recognize in them the same capacity for thought and feeling that you experience in yourself. And it's what connects you to something larger than your individual existence, to the universal human quest for understanding and meaning. In this recognition, there's both great comfort and great responsibility. Comfort, because it suggests that your deepest nature is not subject to the accidents and changes that affect your physical circumstances. Responsibility, because it implies that how you use this capacity for awareness and choice matters in ways that extend beyond your immediate personal concerns. Descartes believed that recognizing our nature as thinking beings should inspire both wonder and ethical commitment. Wonder at the remarkable fact that consciousness exists at all in what might otherwise be a purely material universe. Ethical commitment because the capacity for rational thought brings with it the obligation to seek truth, to act with integrity, and to treat other rational beings with the respect their nature deserves. As we prepare to explore further dimensions of Descartes' philosophical vision, take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary journey we've taken together. From the depths of systematic doubt, through the discovery of the thinking self, to this recognition of the complex richness of human consciousness, we've traced a path that leads not away from ordinary experience, but deeper into its meaning. The questions Descartes raised about knowledge and existence, about mind and body, about individual identity and universal truth, remain as relevant today as they were 3 centuries ago. They invite us to examine our own assumptions, to cultivate intellectual virtues, and to approach the mystery of our own existence with both rigorous honesty and profound appreciation. In the gentle rhythm of philosophical reflection, we find not just abstract ideas but practical wisdom for living thoughtfully in an uncertain world. Each insight builds upon the last, creating a structure of understanding that can support us through the inevitable challenges and changes of human life. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of Descartes' philosophical journey is how it reveals the strange intimacy we have with our own existence. When he arrived at the certainty of the thinking self, he wasn't just solving an abstract logical puzzle. He was pointing towards something you experience directly in this very moment, the immediate presence of your own awareness. Consider how effortlessly you move between different modes of consciousness throughout your day. One moment you're absorbed in focused thinking, working through a problem or following a line of reasoning. The next, you're daydreaming, letting your mind wander through memories and possibilities. Then perhaps you're simply present, aware of your surroundings without actively analysing them. All of these are expressions of what Descartes recognised as the fundamental activity of thinking. But there's something particularly peaceful about the way Descartes understood thinking. He didn't limit it to rigorous logical analysis or mathematical calculation. For him, thinking included doubting, affirming, denying, willing, refusing, imagining, and sensing. It encompassed the full spectrum of conscious experience. When you feel grateful for a moment of beauty, when you wonder about the meaning of a conversation, when you simply notice the weight of your body settling into rest, all of this counts as thinking in Descartes' expansive sense. This broad understanding of mental life helps explain why the Cogito feels so immediately convincing. You don't need to engage in complex reasoning to recognize that thinking is happening. You don't need to define consciousness or analyze its components. The reality of your own awareness is more basic than any theory about it, more immediate than any explanation of it. Yet this immediacy doesn't make consciousness simple or transparent. Descartes was deeply aware of the mysterious quality of inner experience. How does a thought arise? Why do certain memories surface at particular moments? What determines the flow of associations that carries your mind from one idea to another? These questions fascinated him precisely because they point toward aspects of our own nature that remain wonderfully elusive. There's something both humbling and liberating about acknowledging these mysteries within ourselves. Humbling because it reminds us that even our most intimate experience contains depths we don't fully understand. Liberating because it suggests that we're not simply mechanical systems whose every operation can be predicted and controlled. There's genuine spontaneity in consciousness, real creativity, authentic novelty. This connects to Descartes' understanding of human freedom in subtle but important ways. If consciousness were entirely predictable, if every thought and feeling could be traced to prior causes in a deterministic chain, then moral responsibility would become questionable. But the mysterious creative aspect of mental life suggests that we genuinely participate in shaping our own thoughts and choices. Think about moments of genuine decision in your own life. Not the automatic responses or habitual reactions, but those times when you pause, consider alternatives, and consciously choose direction. There's something in these moments that feels irreducible to purely mechanical processes. You're not just the passive result of prior causes, but an active participant in creating what happens next. Descartes saw this capacity for genuine choice as intimately connected to our rational nature. The ability to step back from immediate impulses, to consider reasons and evidence, to act on principle rather than mere desire, represents what he considered most admirable about human beings. It's what allows us to transcend the purely biological and participate in something larger. But this participation in reason isn't something we achieve once and then possess permanently. It's an ongoing activity, a continuous choice to align ourselves with truth and goodness, rather than with mere convenience or comfort. Every day presents us with opportunities to exercise this rational freedom, or to abdicate it in favour of easier options. Consider how this plays out in the realm of belief formation. You're constantly receiving information, encountering claims about the world, being invited to accept various interpretations of events. Descartes would encourage you to approach this stream of potential beliefs with both openness and discrimination. Not everything that sounds plausible deserves your assent. Not every authority merits your trust. Not every popular opinion warrants your agreement. This doesn't mean becoming cynical or paranoid about information sources. Rather, it means cultivating what we might call intellectual patience, the willingness to suspend judgment when evidence is insufficient, to hold beliefs tentatively when certainty isn't available, to remain genuinely curious about matters that haven't been definitively settled. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from this approach to belief. Instead of feeling pressured to have strong opinions about everything, you can allow yourself to live comfortably with uncertainty in areas where uncertainty is appropriate. Instead of defending positions you haven't carefully examined, you can acknowledge the limits of your knowledge with grace and humility. This intellectual humility becomes especially important when we consider how our beliefs affect our relationships with others. How often do disagreements escalate unnecessarily because each person feels compelled to defend their position rather than explore the question together? How much conflict arises from the assumption that there must be a single correct view that one side possesses and the other lacks? Descartes' approach suggests a different possibility. What if we approach disagreement as an opportunity for mutual inquiry, rather than as a battle to be won? What if we recognize that other thinking beings, like ourselves, are trying to make sense of a complex world with limited information and fallible reasoning capacities? This doesn't mean that all opinions are equally valid, but it does mean that all persons deserve respect as fellow participants in the quest for understanding. This respectful approach to disagreement flows naturally from Descartes' recognition that we're all fundamentally similar in our essential nature. Regardless of our different backgrounds, experiences, and conclusions, we share the basic capacity for thought, for doubt, for wonder, for the recognition of truth. This shared rational nature creates a kind of fundamental equality that transcends surface differences. But recognizing this equality doesn't eliminate the need for careful judgment about particular claims and arguments. Some positions are better supported by evidence than others. Some reasoning is more rigorous than alternatives. Some authorities are more reliable than their competitors. The goal isn't to treat all viewpoints as equally valid, but to evaluate them fairly, and to remain open to revising our judgments when warranted. This balanced approach requires what might be called emotional maturity alongside intellectual sophistication. It's one thing to acknowledge abstractly that you might be wrong about something. It's quite another to genuinely welcome evidence that challenges your cherished beliefs, or to change your mind gracefully when the facts demand it. Yet this capacity for intellectual growth and change is part of what makes human life so rich and meaningful. Unlike purely instinctual creatures who respond to their environment in predictable ways, we can learn, adapt, and develop throughout our lives. We can become wiser, more compassionate, more skilled at distinguishing truth from falsehood. We can participate actively in our own formation as thinking beings. Descartes found particular joy in mathematical learning because it provided such clear examples of this growth in understanding. When you suddenly grasp why a geometric proof works, when you see the elegant logic behind an algebraic solution, when you recognize the pattern that makes a complex calculation simple, something wonderful happens. Your mind expands to accommodate new truth, and that truth becomes permanently available to guide future thinking. But this same process of growth and insight occurs in less formal contexts as well. When you understand someone's behavior by recognizing their underlying fears or hopes, when you see how past experiences have shaped present circumstances, when you recognize your own patterns of reaction and response, you're participating in the same kind of learning that delighted Descartes in mathematics. The key insight is that consciousness isn't static. We don't simply possess a fixed set of mental contents that we access like files in a cabinet. Instead, we're continuously engaged in the dynamic process of making sense of experience, integrating new information with existing understanding, refining our grasp of ourselves and our world. This ongoing nature of conscious life helps explain why self-knowledge remains challenging throughout our lives. You might think that since you have direct access to your own thoughts and feelings, understanding yourself would be straightforward. But the self that observes is also the self that's being observed, creating a kind of recursive complexity that keeps self-understanding perpetually interesting. Moreover, you're not the same person from moment to moment in any simple sense. Your thoughts change, your moods shift, your priorities evolve, your understanding deepens. The self that Descartes identified with certainty in the Cogito isn't a fixed entity, but a continuous activity, an ongoing process of thinking, choosing, and experiencing. This process view of personal identity has profound implications for how we understand responsibility, growth, and change. If you're not simply a fixed collection of traits and tendencies, then genuine transformation becomes possible. The patterns that have characterized your thinking and behavior in the past don't necessarily determine your future responses. You can learn new ways of approaching problems, develop different emotional habits, cultivate fresh perspectives on familiar situations. This possibility of change is both liberating and demanding. Liberating because it means you're not trapped by past mistakes or limited by previous self-concepts. Demanding because it places the responsibility for your ongoing development squarely in your own hands. You can't simply blame your circumstances or your history for who you are right now. You must take active responsibility for who you're becoming. As you rest in this quiet space, perhaps you can sense something of this dynamic quality in your own experience. There are thoughts arising and dissolving, feelings emerging and fading, memories surfacing and receding. But there's also something constant throughout all this change, a witnessing presence that remains aware and attentive regardless of the particular contents of consciousness. Descartes would say this witnessing presence is you in your most essential nature, not the particular thoughts you're having or the specific feelings you're experiencing, but the consciousness that makes all thinking and feeling possible. This is what remains constant through all the changes of your life, what connects your present experience with your past memories and future aspirations. Recognizing this deeper continuity within change can bring a particular kind of peace. You don't need to defend every passing thought or identify completely with every temporary emotional state. You can observe the flow of mental events with a kind of loving depths attachment, neither wresting what arises nor clinging to what passes away. This balanced awareness is perhaps what Descartes found most valuable about philosophical reflection. It offers a way of inhabiting your own experience that's neither rigidly controlling nor passively resigned. You actively can engage with the contents of consciousness while maintaining perspective about their temporary nature. You can take your thoughts and feelings seriously without taking them too seriously. In this spirit of gentle engagement with your own inner life, we continue to trace the implications of Descartes' insights for understanding what it means to be human. The journey from doubt through certainty to wisdom isn't just an abstract philosophical exercise, but a practical path for living with greater awareness, compassion, and integrity. The questions Descartes raised about the nature of knowledge and existence invite us to examine our own assumptions and develop our own capacity for clear thinking. The methods he developed for distinguishing truth from falsehood provide tools we can use in our daily decision-making. The vision of human nature he articulated offers both realistic acknowledgement of our limitations and inspiring recognition of our capabilities. Most importantly, perhaps, his philosophy reminds us that the capacity for rational reflection is both a gift and a responsibility. We have the remarkable ability to step back from immediate experience and consider it thoughtfully, to examine our own beliefs and motivations with honesty, to participate consciously in the ongoing creation of our own understanding and character. This capacity connects us to something larger than our individual existence, while also grounding us firmly in the immediate reality of our own experience. In recognizing ourselves as thinking beings, we join a community of rational creatures while also accepting responsibility for our own unique perspective and contribution. As these philosophical reflections settle gently into your awareness, they become not just ideas to consider, but invitations to a way of being. The path Descartes opened through systematic doubt toward authentic certainty remains available to each of us, not as a destination to reach once and for all, but as an ongoing journey of discovery and growth. As we settle deeper into this contemplation of existence and awareness, let's turn our attention to how Descartes' understanding of the mind reveals something profound about the nature of truth itself. Having established the bedrock certainty of the thinking self, he discovered that this wasn't just a single isolated fact, but the beginning of an entire method for understanding reality. You see, when Descartes recognized that he could not doubt his own existence as a thinking being, he wasn't just solving a logical puzzle. He was uncovering a criterion for truth that would guide all his subsequent philosophical investigations. The clarity and distinctness with which he perceived the Cogito became a template for recognizing genuine knowledge in other domains. Think about moments in your own life when you've experienced this kind of crystal clear understanding. Perhaps it was grasping a mathematical concept that had puzzled you for weeks, or suddenly seeing the solution to a problem that had seemed impossible. There's a particular quality to these insights, a sense of inevitability and rightness that distinguishes them from mere opinions or guesses. This is what Descartes meant by clear and distinct perception. But here's what makes this so fascinating from the perspective of how we actually live and think. Descartes wasn't suggesting that we should only believe things we can prove with mathematical certainty. He recognized that practical life requires us to act on probabilities, to make decisions based on incomplete information, to trust our senses and our reasoning even when they might occasionally mislead us. Instead, he was offering us a kind of internal compass, a way of recognizing when our minds are operating at their clearest and most reliable. When we perceive something with genuine clarity and distinctness, when we see not just that something is the case but why it must be the case, we can have confidence in that understanding, even while remaining appropriately humble about areas where our knowledge is less certain. This creates a beautiful balance between intellectual confidence and epistemic humility. We don't need to doubt everything all the time, living in a perpetual state of philosophical paralysis. But we also don't need to pretend that all our beliefs are equally well-founded, or that questioning fundamental assumptions is somehow dangerous or inappropriate. Consider how this might apply to your own process of self-understanding. There are probably aspects of your own nature that you recognize with something approaching Cartesian certainty. Perhaps you know with deep clarity that you value kindness, or that beauty moves you, or that you have a fundamental desire to understand rather than merely to be entertained. These aren't just preferences or opinions, but insights into your essential character. At the same time, there are probably many things about yourself that remain mysterious or uncertain. Why do certain memories affect you so strongly while others fade? What determines which ideas capture your imagination and which leave you cold? How do your conscious intentions relate to patterns of behavior that seem to operate below the threshold of awareness? Descartes would encourage us to hold both kinds of self-knowledge appropriately. Where we have genuine clarity about our own nature, we can act with confidence. Where uncertainty remains, we can proceed with careful attention and openness to discovery. This isn't about achieving perfect self-knowledge, which may be impossible for finite beings, but about developing a mature relationship with the known and unknown aspects of our own existence. This approach becomes particularly valuable when we consider how our understanding of ourselves affects our relationships with others. If we're clear about our own values and motivations, we can engage with others more authentically, without the defensive posturing that often arises from inner uncertainty. If we're honest about the limits of our self-knowledge, we can approach others with genuine curiosity, rather than projecting our own unexamined assumptions onto them. There's something deeply practical about this Cartesian approach to human relationships. Instead of either idealizing people as completely transparent to themselves, or cynically assuming that everyone is fundamentally self-deceived, we can recognize that all of us are works in progress, beings capable of genuine insight and genuine self-deception, often simultaneously. This recognition can transform how we approach conflict and disagreement. When someone holds a view that seems obviously wrong to us, instead of immediately assuming they're either stupid or dishonest, we might consider that they may be seeing something we're missing, or that they may be applying reasonable principles to different experiences than our own. Descartes' method suggests that the most productive approach to disagreement involves a kind of collaborative investigation. Rather than each party defending their position against attack, we might explore together what clear and distinct perceptions each person brings to the question, what assumptions might be operating below conscious awareness, and what evidence might help clarify the matter. This doesn't mean that all viewpoints are equally valid, or that truth is merely subjective. Descartes remained convinced that reality has an objective structure that our minds can discover through careful investigation. But he also recognized that the path to truth often requires the contribution of multiple perspectives, each offering insights that might not be available to any single individual. As you rest here in this quiet space, you might notice how this collaborative approach to truth-seeking mirrors something that happens naturally in your own thinking. When you're working through a difficult question, different aspects of your own mind seem to contribute different perspectives. Your rational, analytical side might offer one kind of insight, while your intuitive, emotional understanding provides another. Your past experience suggests certain possibilities, while your imagination opens up others you hadn't considered. This internal dialogue, this conversation between different aspects of your own consciousness, is perhaps a microcosm of the larger human conversation that philosophy represents. Just as you don't need to silence some aspects of yourself in order to think clearly, the broader human community doesn't need to achieve uniformity of thought in order to make progress toward truth. What's required instead is what we might call intellectual hospitality, a willingness to take seriously perspectives that might initially seem foreign or challenging. This doesn't mean accepting everything uncritically, but it does mean extending to others the same kind of patient, careful attention that Descartes brought to his own thoughts and experiences. This quality of attention is perhaps what's most remarkable about Descartes' philosophical method. He didn't rush to conclusions or accept ideas simply because they were traditional or popular. Instead, he cultivated a capacity for sustained, careful observation of his own mental processes. He learned to distinguish between thoughts that arose from clear perception and those that resulted from habit, wishful thinking, or social pressure. This kind of mental discipline requires practice, much like learning to play a musical instrument or developing physical coordination. At first, it might feel unnatural to pause and examine your own thought processes, to ask yourself why you believe what you believe or how you know what you think you know. But gradually, this reflective awareness becomes more natural, more integrated into your ordinary way of being in the world. The rewards of developing this capacity are subtle but profound. You begin to notice the difference between beliefs you hold tentatively and those you hold with genuine conviction. You become more aware of how your emotional state affects your reasoning, how your physical condition influences your mental clarity, how your social environment shapes your intellectual priorities. This growing self-awareness doesn't make thinking more complicated or burdensome. Instead, it tends to make mental life more efficient and more satisfying. When you know your own mind better, you can trust your judgments more confidently while recognizing more clearly when uncertainty is appropriate. There's a particular kind of freedom that emerges from this self-knowledge. You become less susceptible to manipulation by others because you're more aware of your own motivational patterns. You become less likely to deceive yourself because you've developed habits of honest self-examination. You become more capable of genuine choice because you understand more clearly what you actually value and desire. But perhaps most importantly, this self-knowledge opens up new possibilities for growth and change. When you understand the patterns of your own thinking, you can begin to modify them consciously. When you recognize your own biases and limitations, you can take steps to compensate for them. When you see clearly what you don't yet understand, you can direct your attention toward learning more effectively. This capacity for conscious self-development is what Descartes found most hopeful about human nature. We're not simply the passive products of our genes, our upbringing, or our circumstances. We have genuine agency in shaping our own character and understanding. This agency isn't unlimited, of course. We can't simply think our way out of every difficulty or understand everything we might wish to understand. But within the constraints of our finite nature, we have real power to influence who we become. Consider how this might apply to habits of mind that you'd like to change. Perhaps you tend to worry excessively about future events, or to ruminate unproductively about past mistakes, or to judge others harshly based on limited information. Descartes' approach suggests that the first step toward change isn't forced suppression of these patterns, but careful observation of how they operate. When do these habits typically arise? What triggers seem to activate them? What thoughts or feelings accompany them? What purposes might they be serving, even if they're ultimately counterproductive? By bringing the same kind of systematic attention to these mental patterns that Descartes brought to his philosophical investigations, you can begin to understand them more clearly, and therefore relate to them more skillfully. This process of mental investigation is both deeply and personally universal. Therang particular contents of your thoughts and feelings are unique to your individual experience, but the underlying capacity for self-reflection, for stepping back and observing your own mental processes with curiosity and compassion, is something you share with all conscious beings. This shared capacity for self-awareness creates a kind of fundamental kinship among thinking beings. Regardless of differences in background, belief or circumstance, we all participate in the same basic activity of consciousness examining itself. We all face the challenge of distinguishing reliable insights from wishful thinking. we all experience the mysterious emergence of new understanding from patient reflection. Recognizing this common participation in the adventure of consciousness can be deeply comforting. You're not alone in struggling with questions about meaning, purpose, and truth. You're not the only one who sometimes feels uncertain about important decisions or confused about your own motivations. The capacity for doubt and questioning that might sometimes feel like a burden is actually part of what connects you to the broader human community. At the same time, this recognition doesn't diminish the importance of your individual perspective. Your particular combination of experiences, insights, and questions contributes something unique to the larger conversation. The clarity you achieve through careful self-examination isn't just valuable for your own life, but potentially helpful to others who might benefit from your discoveries. This creates a beautiful reciprocity in intellectual life. By developing your own capacity for clear thinking and honest self-reflection, you become more capable of contributing to collective understanding. By engaging seriously with the insights and questions of others, you enrich your own process of self-discovery. Individual growth and community development support and enhance each other. As you continue to rest in this contemplative space, you might sense something of this dynamic interplay between solitude and community, between private reflection and shared inquiry. The thoughts arising in your own mind right now are both intimately personal and connected to centuries of human wondering about the nature of existence and knowledge. The questions that fascinated Descartes, questions about what we can know with certainty and how we should live in the face of uncertainty, remain as relevant today as they were 3 centuries ago. They invite each of us to take up the work of philosophical reflection, not as an abstract academic exercise, but as a practical path toward greater wisdom and authenticity. In this gentle rhythm of questioning and discovery, we find not just intellectual stimulation, but a way of inhabiting our own existence with greater awareness and appreciation. Each insight builds upon previous understanding while opening up new areas for exploration. Each moment of clarity illuminates both what we know and what we have yet to discover. The journey through systematic doubt toward authentic certainty that Descartes pioneered isn't something we complete once and then set aside. It's an ongoing practice, a continuous choosing to meet our own experience with honesty and curiosity. In this practice, we find both the humility that comes from recognizing our limitations and the confidence that comes from recognizing our genuine capacities for growth and understanding. As these philosophical reflections continue to unfold in your awareness, they invite you to consider how the insights of one 17th century French philosopher might illuminate your own contemporary experience of being conscious, questioning, and alive in a mysterious and wonderful universe. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Descartes' philosophical vision emerges when we consider how his insights about thinking and existence illuminate the nature of human experience itself. Having traced the journey from methodical doubt to the certainty of the cogito, having explored the relationship between mind and body, we now find ourselves face to face with questions that touch the very heart of what it means to be alive and conscious in this world. There's something profoundly moving about the way Descartes understood the human condition. We are, in his view, being suspended between two realms. On one side, we participate in the eternal world of mathematical truths, logical relationships, and rational insights that seem to exist independently of time and circumstance. When you grasp why the sum of the angles in a triangle must equal 180 degrees, you're touching something that would be true even if every physical triangle in the universe were destroyed. On the other side, we're intimately connected to the temporal world of sensory experience, emotional response, and bodily existence. The warmth you feel from sunlight on your skin, the sadness that arises when you remember someone you've lost, the simple pleasure of a favourite meal, all of these experiences are deeply real and meaningful, even though they don't possess the eternal certainty of mathematical truths. This dual nature of human existence creates what we might call a beautiful tension. We long for certainty, for absolute truth, for understanding that transcends the contingencies of our particular circumstances. Yet we also find meaning and joy in precisely those aspects of experience that are most fleeting, most dependent on our specific situation in space and time. Consider how this plays out in your own daily experience. There are moments when you feel connected to something larger than yourself, when a piece of music or a work of art or a conversation with someone you love seems to open onto truths that feel universal and enduring. These experiences have what we might call a Cartesian quality. They seem to reveal something about the fundamental nature of reality itself. But there are also moments of simple presence, when you're fully absorbed in some immediate activity, when the distinction between observer and observed seems to dissolve, when you're not thinking about eternal truths but simply being alive in this particular moment. These experiences are equally valuable, equally real, even though they don't offer the kind of certainty that philosophical reflection seeks. Descartes would suggest that both kinds of experience are essential to a fully human life. The capacity for rational reflection, for stepping back from immediate experience and considering it thoughtfully, is what allows us to participate in truth and meaning that transcend our individual circumstances. But the capacity for immediate engagement, for being fully present to the world around us, is what gives life its richness and texture. This balance between reflection and presence, between thinking and being, requires a kind of wisdom that can't be captured in any single philosophical system. It's more like learning to dance, developing a sense of rhythm and timing that allows you to move gracefully between different modes of awareness as circumstances require. Sometimes the situation calls for careful analysis, for stepping back and examining assumptions, for applying the methods of systematic doubt that Descartes pioneered. When facing an important decision, when trying to understand a complex situation, when evaluating competing claims about truth, this reflective stance serves us well. But sometimes life calls for a different kind of response. When someone you care about is suffering, when you're witnessing a moment of natural beauty, when you're engaged in creative work, excessive analysis might actually interfere with the appropriate response. In such moments, the capacity for immediate presence, for trusting your intuitive understanding, becomes more valuable than philosophical reflection. The key insight is that both capacities, both the rational and the intuitive, emerge from the same fundamental source. They're both expressions of consciousness, both ways that awareness manifests in response to different aspects of experience. Descartes' great contribution was showing us that this consciousness, this capacity for awareness itself, is the most certain and most precious thing about us. As you rest here in this quiet space, you might notice how naturally your own awareness moves between these different modes. Sometimes you're actively thinking about the ideas being presented, analysing them, relating them to your own experience. Sometimes you're simply listening, allowing the words to wash over you without trying to grasp or evaluate them. Both responses are expressions of the thinking substance that Descartes identified as your essential nature. This fluid movement between different modes of consciousness reflects something important about the nature of wisdom itself. Wisdom isn't just about accumulating correct beliefs or developing sophisticated theoretical understanding. It's about learning to respond appropriately to the full range of human experience, knowing when to think and when to simply be, when to doubt and when to trust, when to analyse and when to accept. This kind of practical wisdom requires what we might call emotional intelligence, alongside intellectual sophistication. It's one thing to understand rationally that other people have their own perspectives and experiences. It's quite another to respond to them with genuine empathy and compassion. It's one thing to know theoretically that life involves uncertainty and change. It's quite another to navigate these realities with grace and resilience. Descartes recognized that the thinking self exists not in isolation but in relationship, both with other thinking beings and with the material world. The Cogito establishes the certainty of individual existence, but it also opens up questions about how individual minds connect with each other and with the broader reality of which they're part. Consider the miracle of communication itself. Right now, ideas that emerged in one mind centuries ago are somehow making their way into your consciousness. The thoughts that Descartes had while sitting by his fire in that famous winter retreat are reaching you across time and space, mediated by language, by writing, by the mysterious process through which meaning transfers from one consciousness to another. This capacity for minds to meet, even across vast distances of time and space, suggests something profound about the nature of truth and understanding. When you grasp a mathematical proof that Descartes worked out, you're not just learning historical information about what someone else once thought. You're participating in the same insight, seeing the same logical relationships, touching the same eternal truths that he discovered. This shared participation in truth creates a kind of communion among thinking beings. We're not isolated monads, trapped forever within our own subjective experience. Through reason, through language, through the careful examination of our own consciousness, we can achieve genuine understanding not only of ourselves, but of each other and of the world we share. Yet this communion doesn't eliminate individuality or reduce all minds to some common denominator. Each person brings their unique perspective, their particular combination of experiences and insights to the shared project of understanding. The diversity of human consciousness enriches rather than threatens the pursuit of truth. Think about how this works in your own relationships. When you have a deep conversation with someone you care about, you're not just exchanging information or opinions, you're sharing something of your inner life, offering glimpses of how the world appears from your particular vantage point. And when the other person responds with their own perspective, something new emerges that neither of you could have achieved alone. This dialogical dimension of consciousness reflects something important about how knowledge grows and develops. Individual reflection, the kind of careful self-examination that Descartes practiced, is essential, but it's not sufficient. We also need the challenge and enrichment that comes from encountering other minds, other ways of seeing and understanding. This is why philosophy has always been as much a communal as an individual activity. Even Descartes, who emphasized the importance of thinking for oneself, was deeply engaged with the intellectual community of his time. His ideas emerged from conversations with other thinkers, from responses to their questions and challenges, from the attempt to address problems that concerned many minds working together. The method of systematic doubt that made Descartes famous wasn't just a personal intellectual exercise. It was a contribution to the broader human project of distinguishing truth from falsehood, knowledge from mere opinion, genuine insight from comfortable assumption. By showing us how to question our beliefs more systematically, he provided tools that others could use in their own pursuit of understanding. This generous aspect of philosophical reflection deserves special attention. When you engage seriously with fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, and meaning, you're not just satisfying personal curiosity or advancing your own intellectual development, you're participating in a conversation that spans generations, contributing to humanity's ongoing effort to understand itself and its place in the universe. The insights you achieve through careful self-examination, the clarity you develop about your own values and motivations, the wisdom you gain from reflecting on your experience, all of this has potential value not only for your own life but for others who might benefit from what you've learned. In developing your own capacity for clear thinking and honest self-reflection, you're preparing yourself to contribute to the larger conversation. This creates a beautiful reciprocity between individual development and community service. The more clearly you understand yourself, the more authentically you can engage with others. The more honestly you examine your own beliefs and assumptions, the more helpfully you can participate in collective inquiry. Personal growth and social contribution support and enhance each other. As these reflections settle into your awareness, you might notice how they invite a particular kind of responsibility. If consciousness is indeed the most precious thing about human existence, if the capacity for rational reflection truly sets us apart from purely mechanical systems, then how we use this capacity matters in ways that extend beyond our immediate personal concerns. This doesn't mean that every moment needs to be devoted to philosophical contemplation, or that ordinary pleasures and concerns are somehow illegitimate. Rather, it means that even in the midst of daily activities, there's an underlying invitation to remain aware, to stay present, to approach your experience with the kind of thoughtful attention that can transform routine activities into opportunities for insight and growth. The practice of mindful awareness that emerges from Cartesian reflection isn't about withdrawing from the world, but about inhabiting it more fully. When you bring conscious attention to simple activities like walking, eating, or listening to music, these experiences become richer and more meaningful. When you approach relationships with genuine curiosity about the other person's perspective, conversations become opportunities for mutual discovery. This mindful engagement with experience creates a natural bridge between the contemplative aspects of Descartes' philosophy and its practical applications. The clarity of thought that emerges from systematic self-examination enhances your capacity to respond wisely to whatever challenges and opportunities life presents. Consider how this might apply to decision-making in your own life. Instead of simply following habit or impulse, you can pause and examine your motivations. Instead of accepting the first solution that occurs to you, you can explore alternatives. Instead of assuming that your initial emotional response provides reliable values back, and consider what guidance, you can step and principles you want to guide your choice. This doesn't mean becoming paralyzed by over-analysis or losing touch with intuitive wisdom. Rather, it means developing the capacity to move fluidly between different modes of awareness, drawing on both rational analysis and intuitive insight as circumstances require. It means becoming more skilled at recognizing when careful thought is needed and when spontaneous response is appropriate. The cultivation of this kind of practical wisdom is perhaps the ultimate goal of Cartesian philosophy, not just to achieve theoretical understanding about the nature of mind and reality, but to develop the capacity to live more thoughtfully, more authentically, more skillfully. To become the kind of person who can navigate uncertainty without losing hope, who can remain open to truth without sacrificing conviction, who can engage fully with life while maintaining perspective about its temporary nature. As you rest here in this contemplative space, surrounded by the gentle rhythm of philosophical reflection, you participate in something that connects you to centuries of human wondering and discovery. The questions that puzzle Descartes continue to invite our attention. The methods he developed for examining consciousness remain available to guide our own self-investigation. The vision of human dignity and possibility that emerges from his work continues to inspire those who seek to understand themselves and their world more deeply. In this ongoing conversation between past and present, between individual insight and collective wisdom, between questioning and discovery, we find not just intellectual stimulation, but practical guidance for living with greater awareness and authenticity. The journey from doubt through certainty to wisdom that Descartes pioneered remains as relevant today as it was 3 centuries ago, offering each of us an invitation to explore the remarkable of our mystery-own consciousness with courage, patience, and wonder. The gentle wisdom of Descartes' philosophy reveals something beautiful about how we might approach the everyday mysteries of being human. As you settle more deeply into rest, let's explore how his insights about consciousness and existence illuminate the quiet moments of ordinary life, those times when we pause between activities and simply notice that we are here, aware, present to this moment. Think about those instances when you suddenly become aware of your own awareness. Perhaps you're washing dishes and suddenly notice not just the warm water and soap bubbles, but the fact that you're noticing them. Or maybe you're walking down a familiar street when something shifts, and you become conscious of the consciousness that's taking in the sights and sounds around you. These moments of what we might call meta-awareness, this stepping back from experience to observe the observer, are precisely what Descartes found most remarkable about human nature. There's something almost mystical about this capacity for self-reflection, yet it's also utterly natural and available to us at any moment. You don't need special training or philosophical education to recognize the simple fact of your own awareness. Right now, as these words reach your consciousness, you can notice not just the content of what's being said, but the presence of the mind that's receiving and considering these ideas. This recognition of consciousness itself, independent of any particular content it might contain, points towards something that remains constant through all the changes of your life. Your thoughts change from moment to moment. Your emotions rise and fall. Your physical sensations shift and flow. Your circumstances alter with time. But the awareness that witnesses all of these changes maintains a kind of essential continuity. Descartes would suggest that this witnessing awareness is what you most fundamentally are. Not the particular thoughts you're thinking or the specific feelings you're experiencing, but the consciousness that makes all thinking and feeling possible. This isn't an abstract philosophical claim, but something you can verify through direct observation of your own experience. Consider how this understanding might affect the way you relate to difficult emotions or challenging thoughts when they arise. If you can recognize that you are the awareness in which these experiences appear, rather than being identical with the experiences themselves, they begin to feel less overwhelming, less definitive of who you are. A feeling of sadness becomes something you're aware of rather than something you are. An anxious thought becomes an object of consciousness rather than the subject of consciousness itself. This shift in perspective doesn't make difficult experiences disappear or become pleasant, but it does create a kind of spaciousness around them. There's room to breathe, room to respond rather than simply react, room to maintain some sense of equilibrium even in the midst of challenging circumstances. The storms of emotion and thought can rage, but you remain like a deep lake beneath the surface disturbance, fundamentally undisturbed. This quality of inner stability that emerges from recognizing your essential nature as consciousness itself reflects one of the most practical aspects of Descartes' philosophy. He wasn't just interested in abstract questions about the nature of existence. He was seeking a foundation for living that couldn't be shaken by external circumstances or internal turbulence. In our contemporary world, where we're constantly bombarded with information, opinions, and demands on our attention, this Cartesian anchor becomes especially valuable. When you know who you are at the deepest level, when you're connected to the awareness that underlies all particular experiences, you become less susceptible to being pulled this way and that by the endless stream of external stimuli. You can engage fully with whatever life presents, while maintaining a kind of inner compass that keeps you oriented toward what truly matters. This doesn't mean becoming detached or indifferent, but rather developing the capacity to respond from a place of inner stability rather than reactive confusion. Think about how this might apply to the way you consume information and form opinions about complex issues. Instead of immediately adopting whatever perspective you encounter most recently, or most forcefully, you can pause and return to the clarity of your own direct experience. What do you actually know about this matter? What assumptions might you be bringing to it? What questions remain genuinely open for investigation? This careful, reflective approach to belief formation doesn't slow down decision-making or lead to paralysis. Instead, it tends to make choices more efficient and more satisfying, because they emerge from genuine understanding, rather than from habit, impulse, or social pressure. When you act from clarity rather than confusion, your actions tend to be more effective and more aligned with your deeper values. The cultivation of this inner clarity requires what we might call philosophical patience, a willingness to live with questions rather than rushing to premature answers. In a culture that often rewards quick opinions and confident assertions, there's something countercultural about Descartes' invitation to systematic doubt and careful investigation. Yet this patience with uncertainty, this comfort with not knowing, opens up possibilities for genuine discovery that aren't available to those who must always have an immediate answer to every question. When you can say, "I don't know," without feeling defensive or inadequate, you create space for authentic learning to occur. As you rest here in this quiet space, you might notice how naturally your mind moves between knowing and not knowing, between clarity and mystery. Some aspects of your experience feel transparent and obvious. Others remain beautifully opaque, resistant to analysis or explanation. Both states have their place in a fully lived life. Descartes found particular joy in mathematical certainty precisely because it provided such a clear contrast to the uncertainties that characterize much of human experience. When you see why a geometric proof must be true, you taste something eternal and unchanging in a world of constant flux. These moments of mathematical insight become like lighthouses, fixed points of reference that help navigate the more ambiguous waters of ordinary experience. But even in areas where mathematical certainty isn't available, the same capacity for clear seeing that operates in mathematical reasoning can be applied more broadly. You can learn to recognize the difference between thoughts that arise from clear perception and those that emerge from wishful thinking, fear, or social conditioning. You can develop sensitivity to the quality of different mental states, noticing when your mind is functioning with clarity and when it's clouded by fatigue, emotion, or distraction. This growing familiarity with the landscape of your own consciousness creates a kind of inner weather awareness. Just as you might check the external weather before planning outdoor activities, you can learn to assess your internal conditions before making important decisions or engaging in challenging conversations. When you notice that you're feeling particularly reactive or defensive, you might choose to postpone a difficult discussion until you're in a clearer state of mind. When you recognize that fatigue is affecting your judgment, you might delay an important choice until you're more rested. When you see that excitement or enthusiasm is clouding your ability to assess risks realistically, you might seek input from others who can offer more balanced perspective. This kind of self-awareness doesn't require constant monitoring or near-self-photic analysis. It's more like developing peripheral vision for your own mental states, a gentle background awareness that helps you navigate more skillfully through the complexities of daily life. The beauty of this approach is that it honors both the rational and intuitive aspects of human nature. Sometimes the situation calls for careful analysis and systematic reasoning. Sometimes it calls for trusting your immediate sense of what feels right or wrong. The key is developing the wisdom to know which approach is most appropriate in any given circumstance. This integration of different ways of knowing reflects something profound about Descartes' understanding of human nature. We aren't purely rational beings who should suppress our emotions and intuitions, nor are we purely intuitive beings who should ignore rational analysis. We're complex creatures who can draw on multiple sources of insight, each appropriate to different kinds of situations. Consider how this might apply to relationships and communication. When someone you care about is upset, sometimes what's needed is careful listening and emotional support rather than logical analysis of the problem. When you're making financial decisions, sometimes what's needed is systematic evaluation of options rather than going with your gut feeling. When you're engaged in creative work, sometimes what's needed is openness to inspiration and spontaneous insight rather than methodical planning. The capacity to move fluidly between these different modes of awareness to match your approach to the demands of the situation represents a kind of practical wisdom that goes beyond any particular philosophical system. It's the wisdom of knowing how to live skillfully in a world that requires both careful thought and spontaneous response, both individual reflection and collaborative engagement. This flexible approach to consciousness and decision-making creates what we might call an educated intuition. Instead of simply following your first impulse, you learn to pause and consider. Instead of getting trapped in endless analysis, you learn to trust your deeper sense of what's appropriate. The goal isn't to eliminate either thinking or feeling, but to orchestrate them more skillfully. As these reflections continue to settle into your awareness, you might notice how they invite a particular kind of gentleness toward yourself and others. If we're all finite beings trying to navigate an uncertain world with imperfect information and limited understanding, then perhaps the appropriate response to our mistakes and limitations is compassion rather than harsh judgment. This compassionate understanding doesn't excuse poor choices or eliminate the importance of taking responsibility for our actions. Rather, it creates a context of basic kindness within which genuine learning and growth become possible. When you can acknowledge your mistakes without crushing self-criticism, you're more likely to learn from them. When you can recognize others' limitations without contempt or condescension, you're more likely to engage with them constructively. The cultivation of this compassionate wisdom requires ongoing practice. Much like developing any other skill, each day presents opportunities to respond with greater clarity rather than confusion, with deeper understanding rather than reactive judgment, with more authentic choice rather than habitual response. These small moments of conscious engagement gradually accumulate into a life lived with greater awareness and intentionality. There's something deeply satisfying about this process of conscious development, this gradual refinement of your capacity to meet life's challenges with wisdom and grace. Unlike achievements that can be measured externally, the growth of inner clarity and compassion has its own intrinsic value that doesn't depend on recognition or validation from others. This internal focus doesn't lead to selfishness or withdrawal from the world. Instead, as you become clearer about your own nature and motivations, you become more capable of genuine service to others. When you're not driven by unconscious needs for approval or defensive reactions to criticism, you can respond more authentically to whatever situations arise. The person who has done the inner work that Descartes advocated, who has learned to distinguish between reliable insights and wishful thinking, who has developed comfort with uncertainty alongside confidence in their genuine understanding, such a person becomes a gift to their community. They can be counted on for honest feedback, thoughtful counsel, and steady presence during difficult times. This is perhaps the ultimate practical fruit of philosophical reflection. Not just personal peace or intellectual satisfaction, but the capacity to contribute meaningfully to the welfare of others. When you understand yourself clearly, you can offer that clarity to situations that might otherwise remain confused or conflicted. As you continue this contemplative space surrounded by the gentle rhythm of philosophical inquiry, you might sense how to rest in these ancient questions about consciousness and existence continue to illuminate contemporary life. The methods Descartes developed for examining the mind remain as relevant today as they were 3 centuries ago, offering tools for navigating the complexities of modern existence with greater wisdom and authenticity. The journey from doubt through certainty to practical wisdom isn't something you complete once and then set aside. It's an ongoing practice, a continuous invitation to meet your own experience with honesty, curiosity, and compassion. In this practice, you join a conversation that spans generations, connecting your individual quest for understanding with humanity's broader search for truth and meaning. In the quiet depths of your own consciousness, in the simple recognition of your own awareness, in the gentle rhythm of breathing and being, you touch something that Descartes recognized as the most certain and most precious aspect of human existence. This recognition becomes a foundation not just for philosophical understanding, but for living with greater presence, wisdom, and joy. The questions that began with systematic doubt ultimately lead to profound appreciation for the mystery and wonder of being conscious in remarkable this universe. Each moment of awareness becomes an opportunity to participate consciously in the ongoing creation of understanding and meaning. Each breath becomes a reminder of the extraordinary fact that consciousness exists at all in what might otherwise be a purely material cosmos. As these philosophical reflections blend with the natural rhythm of rest and renewal, they offer not just intellectual insights, but practical guidance for inhabiting your own existence with greater awareness and appreciation. The thinking self that Descartes discovered with such certainty continues to think, to wonder, to choose, and to grow, moment by moment, breath by breath, in the eternal now of conscious awareness. Perhaps one of the most intimate aspects of Descartes' exploration of consciousness emerges when we consider how his philosophy illuminates the nature of memory and personal identity. As you rest here, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, your mind might wander through memories of conversations, places you've been, people you've known. This gentle flow of recollection reveals something profound about the continuity of the thinking self that Descartes discovered. Consider the remarkable fact that you can remember being 5 years old, standing in your childhood bedroom, feeling the texture of a favourite blanket or toy. The body you inhabited then was physically quite different from the one you have now. Most of the cells have been replaced, your height and weight have changed, even your brain has undergone significant transformation. Yet there's something that connects that 5-year-old with who you are today, something that makes both experiences authentically yours. Descartes would suggest that this continuity lies not in physical matter, but in the thinking substance, the consciousness that has witnessed and remembered all these changes. Your memories aren't just stored information, but are part of an ongoing narrative that consciousness constructs about itself. Each time you recall a past experience, you're not simply accessing a file, but are actively recreating the memory from the perspective of who you are now. This creates a fascinating relationship between past and present selves. The person you were last year had access to memories of the person you were 5 years ago, but couldn't remember the experiences you've had in the past 12 months. The person you'll be next year will remember this moment of philosophical reflection, but will bring to that memory all the experiences and insights that lie between now and then. There's something both reassuring and mysterious about this temporal dimension of consciousness. On one hand, memory provides a sense of continuity, a thread that connects different moments of your life into a coherent story. You can trace the development of your interests, values, and relationships across time. You can see how past experiences have shaped present understanding, how challenges you've overcome have contributed to who you've become. On the other hand, memory reveals the fluid, reconstructive nature of personal identity. You're not simply the sum of your past experiences, but are continuously reinterpreting those experiences in light of new understanding. The meaning of a childhood event might shift dramatically as you gain adult perspective. A relationship that once seemed purely positive might reveal complexities you couldn't perceive at the time. This dynamic quality of memory and identity connects to something Descartes found essential about human nature, our capacity for growth and change. Unlike machines, which operate according to fixed programs, consciousness can learn, adapt, and transform itself throughout life. The thinking self isn't a static entity, but a continuous process of experiencing, reflecting, and integrating new understanding. Think about moments in your own life when you've experienced significant shifts in perspective. Perhaps you've had the experience of suddenly understanding something about yourself that had been hidden before, or of seeing a familiar situation in a completely new light. These moments of insight don't just add new information to an existing database, but can transform the entire framework through which you understand yourself and your world. Descartes found such moments of transformation particularly valuable because they demonstrated the active, creative nature of consciousness. We don't simply receive and store experiences passively, but are continuously interpreting, connecting, and making meaning from the flow of life. This meaning-making activity is perhaps what's most essentially human about us. As you lie here in the gentle darkness, perhaps you can notice this meaning-making process at work in your own experience. The philosophical ideas we've been exploring aren't just abstract concepts, but are connecting with your own memories, your own questions, your own sense of what it means to be conscious and alive. This personal resonance isn't a distraction from philosophical understanding, but is precisely how philosophy becomes wisdom. The integration of intellectual insight with lived experience is what transforms mere information into genuine understanding. When Descartes' recognition of the thinking self connects with your own direct awareness of consciousness, when his method of systematic doubt illuminates your own process of examining beliefs, when his vision of human dignity resonates with your own sense of worth and possibility, philosophy becomes not just an academic exercise, but a practical guide for living. This personal dimension of philosophical reflection helps explain why the same ideas can affect different people so differently, and why your understanding of particular concepts might deepen and evolve over time. You bring your unique combination of experiences, questions, and concerns to every philosophical encounter. The insights you derive are shaped not just by the logical structure of the arguments, but by the particular life circumstances and inner development you bring to them. There's something beautifully democratic about this aspect of philosophical engagement. While technical expertise certainly has its place, the most important questions about existence, consciousness, and meaning are ones that every thinking being must grapple with personally. Your own careful attention to your experience, your own honest examination of your beliefs and motivations, your own willingness to sit with difficult questions, these are the primary qualifications for philosophical wisdom. This doesn't mean that all perspectives are equally valid, or that rigorous reasoning doesn't matter. Rather, it means that the ultimate test of philosophical ideas is whether they help you live more wisely, more authentically, more skillfully. The concepts that prove most valuable are often those that illuminate aspects of your experience that had been unclear before, that provide frameworks for understanding patterns you had noticed but couldn't articulate. Consider how Descartes' insights about the relationship between certainty and doubt might apply to decisions you face in your own life. Perhaps you're considering a career change, wondering whether to trust someone who has disappointed you before, or trying to understand your own reactions to challenging circumstances. The Cartesian approach doesn't provide ready-made answers to such questions, but it does offer a method for examining them more clearly. You might begin by noticing what you actually know with clarity versus what you're assuming, or hoping, or fearing. You might distinguish between beliefs you hold tentatively and those you hold with genuine conviction. You might explore what motivations are driving your thinking, what emotional investments might be colouring your judgment, what social pressures might be influencing your perspective. This process of careful self-examination doesn't guarantee that you'll arrive at perfect certainty about complex life decisions, but it does tend to make whatever choices you make more authentic and more thoughtful. When you understand your own thinking process more clearly, when you're honest about both your insights and your limitations, you're more likely to make decisions that align with your deeper values and that you'll be able to live with over time. The practical wisdom that emerges from philosophical reflection has a particular quality that distinguishes it from mere cleverness or technical knowledge. It's wisdom that's been tested against the full complexity of human experience, that takes into account both rational analysis and emotional intelligence, that recognizes both individual autonomy and interconnectedness with others. This kind of wisdom often manifests not in dramatic insights or revolutionary discoveries, but in subtle shifts in how you relate to ordinary experiences. You might find yourself less reactive to criticism, more curious about perspectives that differ from your own, more comfortable with uncertainty in areas where certainty isn't available. You might notice greater ease in acknowledging mistakes, more genuine interest in other people's experiences, increased appreciation for simple moments of beauty or connection. These changes aren't necessarily dramatic or immediately obvious to others, but they can transform the quality of your daily experience in profound ways. When you're not constantly defending your self-image or anxiously seeking external validation, mental energy becomes available for more creative and generous pursuits. When you're comfortable with the limits of your knowledge, you can engage with new ideas more openly and learn more effectively. The cultivation of this philosophical temperament requires patience and gentleness with yourself. The habits of mind that Descartes advocated, the willingness to examine beliefs carefully and hold them tentatively, the capacity to distinguish between clear insight and wishful thinking, these develop gradually through practice rather than through sudden transformation. Each time you pause before reacting defensively to challenging feedback, each time you remain curious about someone whose behaviour puzzles you, each time you acknowledge uncertainty without rushing to fill it with hasty conclusions, you're strengthening these philosophical muscles. Like physical exercise, the benefits accumulate slowly, but create lasting changes in your capacity to navigate life's complexities with greater skill and equanimity. As you continue to rest in this contemplative space, surrounded by the gentle rhythm of philosophical inquiry, you might sense how these ancient questions about consciousness and existence weave themselves naturally into the fabric of contemporary life. The thinking self that Descartes discovered with such certainty continues to think, to question, to choose, and to grow in each moment of aware presence. The methods he developed for examining consciousness remain remarkably fresh and relevant, offering tools that can help you navigate the particular challenges and opportunities of your own historical moment. Whether you're dealing with information overload, relationship difficulties, career uncertainties, or simply the ongoing challenge of living authentically in a complex world, the Cartesian invitation to careful self-reflection provides a foundation for wise response. The recognition that consciousness itself is the most certain and precious aspect of human existence becomes not just a philosophical position, but a lived reality that can inform every aspect of daily life. In the simple awareness of being aware, in the quiet recognition of your own thinking presence, in the gentle attention you bring to each moment of experience, you participate in the same fundamental reality that captivated Descartes 3 centuries ago. This participation connects you not only with historical figures like Descartes, but with all conscious beings who have ever wondered about the nature of their own existence. The questions that arise naturally from careful attention to consciousness, questions about knowledge and belief, about identity and change, about meaning and purpose, these questions create a kind of universal kinship among thinking beings across time and culture. In recognizing yourself as part of this larger community of questioners and seekers, individual philosophical reflection becomes connected to humanity's broader quest for understanding and wisdom. Your own growth in clarity and compassion contributes to the collective development of human insight. Your willingness to examine difficult questions honestly and openly creates ripples that extend far beyond your immediate personal circumstances. The Cartesian journey from doubt through certainty to practical wisdom thus becomes not just a personal adventure, but a contribution to the ongoing evolution of human consciousness itself. In learning to think more clearly, to choose more authentically, to respond more skillfully to life's challenges, you participate in something larger than individual self-improvement. You become part of the ancient and continuing human project of awakening to truth, beauty, and goodness. As these philosophical reflections blend naturally with the rhythm of rest and renewal, they offer not just intellectual stimulation, but practical guidance for inhabiting your own existence with greater presence and appreciation. The thinking self discovers itself anew in each moment of conscious awareness, in each breath, in each gentle recognition of the extraordinary mystery of being conscious at all. In this ongoing discovery, philosophy reveals itself not as an abstract academic discipline, but as an intimate exploration of what it means to be human. The questions Descartes raised about the nature of mind and reality invite each of us to become philosophers in the truest sense, lovers of wisdom who approach existence with wonder, honesty, and deep appreciation for the remarkable gift of consciousness itself. The gentle wisdom that emerges from this philosophical engagement becomes a light that illuminates not only intellectual questions, but every aspect of lived experience. In the recognition of your own thinking nature, in the cultivation of clear judgment and compassionate response, in the ongoing practice of conscious living, you embody the deepest insights of Cartesian philosophy while making them freshly relevant to your own unique journey through this mysterious and wonderful existence. As we near the end of our gentle, let's turn our attention to perhaps journey through Descartes' philosophical landscape, the most tender and human aspect of his vision, the way his insights about consciousness illuminate what it means to live with wonder, gratitude, and deep appreciation for the simple fact of being alive in this remarkable universe. There's something almost childlike about the sense of amazement that emerges from truly grasping what Descartes discovered about the nature of existence. When you really pause to consider it, the fact that consciousness exists at all is perhaps the most extraordinary thing in the entire cosmos. Here we are, patterns of awareness arising from what might otherwise be merely matter and energy, capable of questioning our own existence, of contemplating beauty, of experiencing love and wonder, and the quiet joy of understanding. Think about the miracle of this very moment. You're lying here in the darkness, and somehow these words are reaching across the space between us, travelling from one consciousness to another through the mysterious medium of language and meaning. The thoughts that first arose in Descartes' mind centuries ago are somehow present in your awareness right now, not as dead historical artifacts, but as living ideas that can still spark recognition and insight. This capacity for minds to meet across time and space, for understanding to bridge the apparent separateness between individual consciousness, suggests something profound about the interconnected nature of all thinking beings. We're not isolated islands of awareness, but participants in a larger symphony of consciousness that spans cultures and centuries. When you experience a moment of genuine understanding, whether it's grasping a mathematical relationship or suddenly seeing why someone behaved as they did, you're touching the same fundamental capacity for insight that Descartes celebrated as the most godlike aspect of human nature. These moments of clarity don't belong to you alone, but connect you to the universal human capacity for wisdom and truth. There's deep comfort in this recognition, especially during times when life feels uncertain or overwhelming. No matter what external circumstances you face, no matter how confused or lost you might sometimes feel, the essential capacity for awareness, for thinking, for recognizing truth when it appears, remains intact. This is what cannot be taken from you, what remains constant through all the changes and challenges of life. Descartes found particular solace in this understanding during his own times of uncertainty and upheaval. Living through wars and social transformation, witnessing the collapse of old certainties and the emergence of new worldviews, he discovered that the one thing that remained unshakable was the simple fact of his own conscious existence. This became his anchor, his foundation for rebuilding confidence in knowledge and meaning. Perhaps you can sense something similar in your own experience. When everything else feels unstable, when the future seems unclear or the past seems filled with regret, there remains this quiet presence of awareness itself, this gentle witness that observes all experiences without being diminished by any of them. This witnessing consciousness is like a still point in a turning world, a place of rest and refuge that's always available. The beauty of Descartes' discovery is that it doesn't require any special preparation or achievement to access this fundamental certainty. You don't need to be particularly intelligent or educated or spiritually advanced. The recognition of your own thinking nature is available to anyone willing to pause and notice the simple fact of their own awareness. This democratic quality of consciousness reflects something important about human dignity and worth. Regardless of external circumstances, social position, or personal achievements, every conscious being possesses this same essential capacity for awareness and understanding. This creates a fundamental equality that transcends all surface differences and divisions. When you truly grasp this, it can transform how you relate to others. The person who disagrees with you politically, the colleague who irritates you, the stranger you pass on the street, all of them share this same fundamental nature as conscious beings capable of thought, feeling and insight. This recognition doesn't eliminate differences of opinion or preference, but it does create a foundation of basic respect and kinship. There's something profoundly healing about this perspective, especially in times when social and political divisions seem particularly sharp. Beneath all the arguments and conflicts lies this shared participation in consciousness, this common capacity for wonder and questioning, and the search for meaning. We're all in this together in the most fundamental sense, all trying to make sense of existence with the same basic equipment of awareness and reasoning. This sense of shared humanity extends not just to contemporary others, but to all conscious beings throughout history. When you read the words of ancient philosophers, medieval mystics, or modern scientists, you're encountering expressions of the same consciousness that you experience in yourself. The particular contents differ, but the underlying capacity for thought and insight remains constant. This creates a kind of conversation across time, a dialogue between minds that transcends the limitations of individual mortality. The insights you develop through your own careful attention to consciousness become part of this larger conversation, contributions that might somehow benefit others you'll never meet. Your growth in wisdom and compassion ripples outward in ways you may never know about, but that nonetheless matter. As you rest here in this peaceful space, perhaps you can sense your participation in this vast community of conscious beings. Your willingness to engage seriously with questions about existence and meaning connects you to everyone who has ever wondered about the nature of their own awareness. Your capacity for philosophical reflection makes you part of humanity's ongoing quest for understanding and truth. This participation doesn't require any dramatic action or achievement. Simply by bringing conscious attention to your own experience, by examining your beliefs with honesty, by remaining open to new insights and perspectives, you're contributing to the collective growth of human wisdom. Every moment of genuine awareness is both deeply personal and universally significant. The Cartesian vision of human nature as essentially conscious and rational creates a beautiful balance between individual uniqueness and universal connection. You're irreplaceably yourself, with your particular combination of experiences, insights, and questions. Yet you also participate in something larger than individual existence, in the shared project of consciousness knowing itself more deeply. This balance helps explain why philosophical reflection feels both intimately personal and broadly relevant. The questions that emerge from careful attention to your own consciousness are the same questions that have fascinated thinking beings throughout history. Your particular answers might be unique, but the underlying wondering connects you to the entire human community. As we draw near the end of our contemplative journey together, it feels appropriate to acknowledge the gift that Descartes offered to all who would come after him, by showing us how to find certainty in the midst of doubt, how to trust our capacity for clear thinking while remaining humble about our limitations, how to approach existence with both rigorous honesty and profound appreciation. He opened a path that remains available to anyone willing to walk it. The method of systematic doubt that began his philosophical adventure isn't just a historical curiosity, but a practical tool for anyone seeking to live more authentically. The recognition of consciousness as the foundation of all knowledge isn't just an abstract principle, but a lived reality that can inform. The every moment of daily experience vision of human beings as essentially thinking creatures isn't just a theoretical position, but an invitation to inhabit your own existence more fully. Perhaps most importantly, Descartes showed us that the deepest questions about existence and meaning aren't obstacles to peace and contentment, but doorways to a richer, more meaningful way of being in the world. The uncertainty that might initially seem disturbing becomes a space of possibility. The questioning that might feel threatening becomes a path to greater understanding. The doubt that might appear destructive becomes a tool for discovering what truly cannot be doubted. In this gentle transformation of doubt into wonder, of questioning into appreciation, of uncertainty into openness, we satisfaction but practical find not just intellectual wisdom for living. The thinking self that Descartes discovered with such certainty continues to think and choose and grow in each moment of conscious awareness, in each breath, in each quiet recognition of the extraordinary gift of being alive and aware. As these philosophical reflections settle into the natural rhythm of rest and renewal, they become not just ideas to remember, but invitations to a way of being. The path from systematic doubt to genuine certainty to practical wisdom remains open, not as a destination to reach once and for all, but as an ongoing journey of discovery and growth. In the gentle darkness that surrounds you, in the quiet rhythm of breathing and being, in the simple recognition of your own awareness, you touch something that connects you to the deepest insights of human wisdom while remaining utterly present and immediate. This is perhaps the final gift of Cartesian philosophy, not just understanding about the nature of consciousness, but the living reality of consciousness itself, aware, present, and eternally capable of wonder. The questions that began our journey continue to resonate, not as problems to be solved once and for all, but as invitations to ongoing reflection and discovery. What does it mean to exist? How can we distinguish truth from illusion? What is the relationship between mind and reality? These questions live not in books or lectures, but in the immediate reality of your own conscious experience, waiting to be explored with fresh eyes in each moment. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you can carry with you this recognition of your own essential nature as a thinking, questioning, wondering being. In dreams and in waking, in certainty and in doubt, in activity and in rest, this consciousness that you are remains present, aware and capable of touching truth, beauty and meaning in ways both profound and simple. The gentle wisdom of philosophy becomes not something you possess, but something you participate in. Not a conclusion you reach, but a way of travelling. Not an answer that ends questioning, but a quality of attention that makes every moment an opportunity for deeper understanding and greater appreciation of the remarkable mystery of being conscious in this vast and wonderful universe. In the quiet sanctuary of your resting place, as consciousness gently prepares to release its hold on waking thoughts, there remains one final thread in Descartes' tapestry of understanding that deserves our gentle attention. It's the thread that weaves together all we've discovered about thinking, existing, and the profound responsibility that comes with being conscious creatures in an uncertain world. You see, Descartes understood something that resonates deeply with anyone who has ever lain awake wondering about their place in the grand scheme of things. He recognized that once we accept the certainty of our own thinking existence, once we grasp that consciousness is the most fundamental fact about ourselves, we're faced with a beautiful and somewhat daunting realization. We are not passive observers of reality, but active participants in creating the meaning and understanding that shape our world. Think about this for a moment. Every belief you hold, every decision you make, every relationship you nurture emerges from this thinking consciousness that you undeniably are. You're not simply receiving a prepackaged reality, but are continuously interpreting, choosing, and responding to the flow of experience that constitutes your life. This places upon you a kind of gentle responsibility, not burdensome, but rather like being entrusted with something precious. Consider how this understanding might transform your relationship with everyday choices. When you decide how to respond to someone who has hurt you, when you choose what to believe about a complex situation, when you determine how to spend your limited time and energy, you're exercising this fundamental capacity for conscious choice that Descartes identified as the essence of human nature. There's something both humbling and empowering about recognizing this. Humbling because it acknowledges that you could be wrong, that your perspective is limited, that wisdom requires ongoing attention and care. Empowering because it recognizes that within these limitations you possess genuine agency, real freedom to shape your responses to whatever life presents. This delicate balance between humility and confidence reflects one of the most mature insights of Cartesian philosophy. You don't need to know everything in order to act wisely. You don't need perfect certainty in order to make meaningful choices. What you need is the willingness to use your capacity for clear thinking as skillfully as possible, while remaining open to new understanding as it emerges. And so, as you settle into the gentle embrace of sleep, carry with you this profound recognition that Descartes offered to the world. In the simple act of thinking, in the quiet awareness of your own consciousness, you touch something unshakable and eternally present. From the deepest valleys of doubt to the heights of certainty, from questions about the nature of reality to the practical wisdom of living authentically, his philosophical journey becomes your own invitation to inhabit existence with greater wonder and appreciation. Rest now in the knowledge that you are a thinking being in a mysterious universe, capable of doubt and discovery, of questioning and understanding, forever participating in the beautiful human adventure of consciousness knowing itself. Thank you for joining me tonight, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom we've explored together.